on this issue, given that you've seen from Trump and his top principles so much criticism of this war, saying it never should have started, blaming Biden, I just don't see Trump backing down on this one, as much as he's been two-faced about war.
So recently, Aaron Maté, who I consider one of the greatest independent journalists on the planet, sat down with Andrew Napolitano on his podcast, Judging Freedom, and they talked a little bit about the Ukraine war, the trajectory that it's on, whether Trump intends to stick to his guns on that, which seems to have come into question lately, and also some other related foreign policy elements, including European and NATO chest beating and, promises to support Ukraine into the future. So I can't wait to hear what he has to say about this. So let's watch and let's react.
How do you account, or do you have an opinion on the recent bellicosity of the language of Prime Minister Starmer, European Commission President von der Leyen, the French President Macron? I mean, this is almost farcical, isn't it?
It is farcical, but they're grappling with the fact that there's now a chief proxy war sponsor in Washington, and Donald Trump, who's no longer willing to play along with this whole ruse that the NATO alliance is in Ukraine for as long as it takes. Trump is pulling the plug on that, and accordingly, he's showing Europe their place. They were always subordinates in this proxy war coalition. Yes, they provided some weaponry to Ukraine, but as a recent New York Times front page article underscores, it was the U.S. running the show the entire time, to the point where from a U.S. military base in Germany, U.S. commanders were choosing the targets for Ukraine to hit and helping them directly hit them. I'm talking about Russian targets inside of Ukraine, and the way they got out of this semantically. This is one of the few interesting revelations in this article. The way they got out of the semantically is, rather than calling Russian targets, they called them points of interest. So that way, technically, they can say, no, we're not helping Ukraine select targets.
And what's so interesting about this is that New York Times article is really interesting. Actually, it's, believe it or not, decent journalism for the New York Times, but it gets into the fact that the U.S. was much more deeply involved in conducting this war as kind of a primary player than had ever been known before. So it's really interesting. Everyone should read that article. But I also think it's kind of ironic and interesting that the European bulldogs that are talking so tough on war aren't really bankrolling this war at all. And they're being equally tough in their rhetoric towards Trump and acting like he's some kind of, huge anti-Zelensky force when he's part of the country that's bankrolled the whole thing. They haven't done that. And he's restored aid to Ukraine after turning it off for some time. So, it's funny how they kind of act like much more bellicose toward this thing than Trump, who is technically bankrolling it.
Simply by changing the word from targets to points.
Well, this is Orwell on steroids. They can call it what they want, but this is the United States of America targeting Russian assets, which means military equipment and human beings, and causing human beings to be killed by American equipment, the triggers on which were fired either by Americans or Ukrainians.
We have been directly at war with Russia, using Ukrainians as the bullet stoppers. Short of sending our own troops, we've been at war with Russia. And this New York Times article underscores that. It also reveals that it was the U.S. that helped plan all these counteroffensives. This idea that we were just following Ukraine's lead, all that is put to the side in this article. It was the U.S. devising all of these plans from the start. And amazingly, they still, in the article, the Times U.S. sources throw Ukraine under the bus. The reason they say why all this failed is not because, we did anything wrong. It's because Ukrainians didn't follow the plan to our specifications. So it's incredibly cynical.
Yeah, it's so true. I've said it once, but I'll say it 1,000 times. The U.S. views Ukraine as a pawn on the grand chessboard of the U.S. empire, and it always has. The war regime has, at least. Even Bill Clinton flirted with this idea in the 90s. At the end of George W. Bush's administration, when he said, Ukraine must be part of NATO, he was doing the same. So this was the case even before Putin invaded Ukraine, which was in, I believe, like the 7th year of that civil war between forces of the Donbass region, which are culturally more Russian, and the Ukraine government, which, by the way, the U.S. played a role in toppling in 2014.
Here's a bellicose Secretary General of NATO. Well, now I don't know if this number is true, 20 billion, but boasting about what he says the EU has given to Ukraine. Chris, cut number 3.
NATO allies continue our support to Ukraine. In the first 3 months of this year, allies have already pledged more than 20 billion euros in security assistance for 2025.
It pledged.
Exactly, Judge.
Delivered. Okay.
Exactly.
I didn't catch that.
That's the key word. It's pledge.
Yeah.
There was a recent article in the New York Times about how Europe is struggling to find its identity now that Trump is pulling the plug on the proxy war. And there's a quote from some European leader who says, yes, we're the coalition of the willing, but willing to do what? They don't even know. They call themselves the coalition of the willing, but they don't know what they're willing to do because they can't do anything. It's the U.S. running the show all along. And if the U.S. pulls away, it looks like Trump is doing, then Europe's role is finished.
Yeah, Europe right now is the puppy dog that barks from one side of the fence over and over. Sounds like the fiercest and most ferocious dog. But as soon as you approach it and reach out your hand and pet it, you know that dog is all bark and no bite. That's what Macron is right now. That's what Starmer is right now. That's what van der Leyen is right now. They pledge money. They don't support it. The U.S. actually supports it. $200 billion of taxpayer money says that. And I'm not proud to say that, but that's the truth.
Has Trump pulled the plug? Aren't we still sending massive amounts back from a prior Congress that authorized it, and obviously a prior president who signed it? But aren't we still? Isn't the pipeline still open?
Amen.
The Joe Biden pipeline.
The pipeline is still open, and as long as it is, Ukraine will keep fighting. But when it runs out, and it will run out, then what is Trump going to do? Is Trump really going to go before Congress and ask for tens of billions of dollars in additional funding for this proxy war that he campaigned against? Look, it's possible. He campaigned as the anti-war candidate. He campaigned against bombing Yemen. Now he's bombing Yemen on behalf of Israel.
And threatening to bomb Iran, by the way.
So anything is possible. But on this issue, given that you've seen from Trump and his top principles so much criticism of this war, saying it never should have started, blaming Biden, I just don't see Trump backing down on this one. As much as he's been two-faced about war, on this one, I think he'll stick to his guns.
I hope Aaron's right, because his view of this is a little bit more charitable than mine. And ultimately, I hope that that is the truth, that Trump just realizes at some point you have to pull the plug, because if he doesn't, this is going to go on indefinitely. Russia's going to fight on, and Ukraine is going to fight on as long as money gets funneled in there from the U.S. taxpayer at our expense, while there's an inflation crisis, while the stock market is in the process of tanking pretty hard. And that's the truth. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks on that front.
On Yemen, Pepe Escobar says that the Yemenis' determination to continue to do their best to prevent Israeli shipping is undiminished. That the vast majority of what Pete Hegseth and his colleagues have attacked and destroyed has been civilian infrastructure. The people killed have been civilians. There's no groundswell for war in the United States against Yemen. We've been bombing Yemen since George W. Bush was in the White House in 2002. It doesn't seem to have had any effect. Where is this going? Does this just enable Donald Trump to say, hey, Bibi, look what we did for you lately?
I think that's exactly what it is. The U.S. has been aiding and abetting a war on Yemen for a very long time. Recently, last month was the 10th anniversary of Barack Obama authorizing a Saudi bombardment of Yemen, in which the U.S. played an integral role under both Obama and then Trump in his first term, and then Biden once again. So that policy hasn't dislodged Ansar Allah, the Houthis. And I don't see why Trump is any different, except, as Pepe Escobar pointed out, killing lots of civilians, as we know happened in that strike that Mike Waltz was so giddy about in the Signal chat.
This is why Aaron is so good. He's covered this war in Ukraine for so long. And, you know, the common Trump apologist response to this bombing in Yemen and, is that, oh, hey, they fired on our ships. Well, our ships have been there as part of a starvation campaign on behalf of the Saudis at first, and now the Israelis for a decade, more than a decade. The U.S. has been there starving people, and it might end up costing about 1 million lives in total. There's various estimates about the number of deaths in this civil war, in this starvation blockade that supplies and basic medicines can't get in. But most of those projections show about 500,000 deaths. So this is crazy. The U.S. needs to get out of there, and I'm so glad that Aaron knows the full history about it, because the war regime will always pretend that history started yesterday out of convenience for more war.
The Signal chat, excuse me, in the Signal chat, there was not a single syllable about the morality or lawfulness of doing this. It was only the process. In fact, if you read the whole thing, if you read what the vice president said, you wonder if Trump even knew they were having this chat.
That's true. J.D. Vance alluded to the fact that Trump might not even understand what the bombing of Yemen is about. And J.D. Vance was opposing it, but J.D. Vance couldn't even articulate why the U.S. was bombing Yemen, which was on behalf of Israel. J.D. Vance said this was for Europe, even though this has nothing to do with Europe. This is on behalf of Israel because the Houthis, Ansar Allah, were intervening against ships in a bid to pressure Israel to respect the ceasefire and stop imposing a starvation siege on Gaza. That's why Trump is bombing Yemen. And it's funny that J.D. Vance, the one opponent of this or critic of this, couldn't even articulate why Trump was doing it.
Is it that he couldn't articulate that, or is it because you just can't say that in Washington political circles, especially that high up, when the Israel lobby has clear command over this administration? Mir Mandelson gave him $100 million. He stacked his cabinet with many Zionist choices that are diehards, not just moderate ones like Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio and Elise Stefanik and Mike Huckabee. The list goes on to that regard.
Excuse me.
I wonder, Pepe Escobar wonders if the ships at Diego Garcia are there to attack Iran or to attack Yemen.
Well, that's a great question. And Trump has been increasingly belligerent in his rhetoric. He's been directly threatening Iran. What did he tell NBC News the other day? That if Iran doesn't abandon its nuclear program and make a deal, then there will be bombing that like we've never seen before. And he's also blaming Iran for the actions of Ansar Allah, even though, as far as I know, Ansar Allah, the Houthis, act pretty autonomously, not at Iran's direction. So Trump is forgetting that he campaigned against war. He promised to restore peace to the Middle East. As we can see in the ongoing destruction of Gaza and his bombing of Yemen, he's doing the exact opposite, at least in that region of the world.
In many ways, foreign policy-wise, Donald Trump campaigned like Ron Paul and is governing like John McCain, and it didn't take him that long. I hate to say that. I didn't want to see that, and I honestly thought that he wouldn't push the Middle East wars further than the status quo right away. Like, at least under Biden, we weren't, threatening Iran all the time. He did bomb Iran with a few targeted bombings, but he didn't speak with such, bellicosity towards the Iranian regime, which I guess words and actions have different value. Your actions do matter. So, hey, I'm still holding out hope that Trump is just trying to wield a large stick and, speak like a barking dog and won't follow through with this on behalf of Israel, because Israel's wanted to topple that regime for so long. But we'll see.
Just want to find a tape here that I want to run for you. Bear with me for a minute. Here's you'll get a kick out of this. The State Department spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, was worse than Matt Miller. At least Miller looked you in the eye when he talked to you. He didn't read off of an iPad. Here she is yesterday about Iran, or it's actually 3 days ago. Cut number 18.
Iran's behavior across the globe threatens U.S. national interests, which is why President Trump reimposed the maximum pressure campaign designed to end Iran's nuclear threat, curtail its ballistic missile program, and stop it from supporting terrorist groups. As the president has said, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. He has also been very clear that the United States can't allow that to occur. The president expressed his willingness to discuss a deal with Iran, as we know. If the Iranian regime does not want a deal, the president is clear he will pursue other options which will be very bad for Iran.
I'm bored to tears watching her read like that. How do the journalists perceive her as being credible when all she does is read something somebody else wrote?
It's a great question. There was such relief seeing the end of the Biden administration after so much just malicious lying for so long in defense of Israel, and so much just disingenuous rhetoric coming from the aforementioned Matt Miller. But now what does the Trump administration do? It's Matt Miller, but even with less of an effort to even appear fair-minded. You know, the Biden administration pretended to care about Palestinian rights and about the international law. Now everything is all just Iran, Hamas, everything is Hamas's fault. And it's all just the Israeli talking points, 100%. Whereas with Biden administration, sometimes they would say, we're going to pressure Israel to comply with the internet. Now the Trump administration just basically reads Israel's scripts, doesn't even bother to pretend that they are any different than the Israeli government in terms of policy. Now, perhaps that's refreshing. At least they're more honest up there in their brazen support for Israel. But from a moral point of view, and from the point of view of people who thought that maybe Trump represented America first, not Israel first, it's disappointing.
I have to admit, a small piece of me thought that when Trump was involved in orchestrating the ceasefire. But ultimately, in the last few weeks, it's clear that Netanyahu sabotaged it, and the green light for that had to have come from Trump, who arranged this ceasefire and is financing, much of the bloodshed in Gaza. So it's a sad but true story, and I really just hope the administration doesn't stay on this warlike trajectory.
Talking about that, I sense no outrage, domestically or internationally, to reports of the IDF executing 15 UN aid workers, one after another, civilians, unarmed, murdered, execution style. Why is there no outrage? Is there so much death that doesn't faze anymore?
That's what it is. This genocide has become normalized. Israel has carried out some of the worst crimes in human history before our eyes and with our support. And because our media does such a good job covering up for it and whitewashing the atrocities, it's become normal now. It's become normal to wake up every day and see countless images of dead Palestinian children on your screen, as if that's like a routine occurrence like the weather. And so atrocities that would otherwise attract singular attention, the execution of Palestinian medics found in horrific conditions, now it just seems like routine. That's the reality we're living with. The way I try to deal with it is listen, that there have been horrific atrocities in human history, horrific crimes, horrific outbursts of collective insanity, like the Nazi Holocaust. And this is just one that we're living through right now. We're all here for it.
Man, what a sad state of affairs for humanity. I couldn't agree more. And it's just so sad to see. Let's hope that there's a new, longer-lasting ceasefire. But honestly, I don't think that there's any military solution for Israel. There has to be a political solution. And that's a multi-state solution. And Israel doesn't want to hear that. All of the Likud party policy has to do everything up to and including support Hamas to try to keep that from happening. But, that I do think is the only solution.
So the Israeli defense minister, whose name is Israel Katz, announced that the IDF would be capturing more territory in Gaza. And the spokesperson for the family of the hostages said, "Oh, you're trading our family members for land." Does that resonate with Netanyahu or not?
Well, he doesn't care about the hostage families, obviously. He could have gotten all of them released long ago, even before his forces entered Gaza, when Hamas offered to release everybody if Israel promised not to do an invasion. And there have been many more opportunities since. He doesn't care. He just doesn't care. His goal, as he's made clear, is to force as many Palestinians as possible to leave. He just basically touted Trump's plan, which is ethnic cleansing. And that's what he's pursuing now. He is taking every opportunity he can to destroy as much of Gaza as possible and to force as many people as possible to leave.
Some pretty sad but true comments from Aaron there. I think he's mostly on the mark here, and maybe our biggest area of disagreement in this whole kind of presentation is his thoughts on Ukraine, because he seems to be more optimistic than me that a peace is coming there. And I think in some way he is right that I don't anticipate Trump going to Congress asking for a huge new package to support Ukraine, but there will be forces within the military industrial complex and the war regime to try to make that happen, including the neocons that are still in Congress. There are a lot of them. The Crenshaws of the world still exist, I hate to say. You know, it seems like Trump, you know, the illusion is that Trump killed the neocons, but he sure as hell is incorporating a lot of neocon foreign policy into his administration, especially in the Middle East. We don't need to be involved there, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse, more entangling and more entangling. It's Yemen now, then it could be Iran, and let's hope Saudi Arabia doesn't get involved in this either, or Syria, you know, or Lebanon, because all those countries are involved in what could be a greater Middle East war, which would be an utter catastrophe that we haven't seen since maybe 1973 or 1967. So let's hope that doesn't happen. But I do want to hear from you guys. Has Trump abandoned the anti-war, non-interventionist rhetoric for good? Or is this just part of a ploy to secure peace? Peace through bombing Yemen. Is that what Trump's trying to do here? Some 4D chess maneuver that involves bombing to stop wars? Let me know in the comments below. I remain skeptical, but until I talk to you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no inflation, and no more empire. Take it easy, guys. Have a good one.